There's something different about an old grudge when it wakes up. It doesn't arrive like a new argument. It doesn't knock politely. It comes back like a storm that already knows the way into your house. And that's exactly what this feels like. Because what's happening between 50 Cent and T.I right now is not some random internet clash that started over one slick comment and spiraled out of control. No, this thing feels older than the headlines, heavier than the memes, more personal than the average rap exchange the internet chews up for 2 days and forgets by Friday. What we're watching is the return of something unfinished. And now DJ Akademiks has stepped into the middle of it all, not as a participant, but as the loudest narrator in the room, breaking down every post, every song, every insult, every move like he's calling the final rounds of a prize fight that suddenly got way more dangerous than anybody expected. At first, this looked like rap beef. Now it's starting to look like something bigger. Because once diss tracks turn into legal pressure, once memes turn into character assassination, once families get involved, once a documentary threat enters the picture, this stops being entertainment in the clean, safe way people like to pretend entertainment works. This becomes war by other means. And if you're only looking at the latest clips, you're missing the real story. Because this didn't begin in 2026. It didn't even begin in the streaming era. To understand why this has become so personal, so ugly, and so explosive, you have to go back, way back. Back to when both of these men were at the height of their powers, both convinced they sat on top of the culture, and both absolutely unwilling to let the other wear a crown uncontested. This is Queens versus Atlanta. This is pride versus pride. This is legacy versus legacy. And this is what happens when two men who built their names on dominance refuse to let old wounds stay buried. So let's slow this all the way down and really look at it. Because DJ Akademiks isn't just covering a beef. He's documenting how a 20-year rivalry came back to life, and how it may be evolving into something neither side can fully control. The history people forgot. One of the biggest mistakes people make with rap beef is thinking it begins when the internet notices it. That's not how it works. By the time the public starts reposting clips and choosing sides, the tension has usually been building for years, sometimes quietly, sometimes through little jabs that only the people involved can truly feel, sometimes through interviews, old resentments, competitive pride, and one sentence that lands harder than it sounds to everybody else. That's the story here. The tension between T.I and 50 Cent stretches back nearly 2 decades, and it wasn't born from one explosive moment. It was built piece by piece, through status, ego, region, image, and the kind of rivalry that happens when two artists see themselves not just as stars, but as rulers. Back in the mid-2000s, T.I was becoming one of the defining voices of Southern rap. He wasn't just successful, he was establishing identity. He was planting a flag. Albums like King weren't subtle statements, they were declarations. He was claiming position, claiming authority, claiming a throne. And in rap, when a man starts calling himself king, somebody is always waiting to challenge the title. Enter 50 Cent. 50 was already a phenomenon by then, a force, a disruptor, a man who had changed how rap power could look in the mainstream. He had the records, the fear factor, the business mind, and maybe most importantly, he had a gift for disrespect. He understood something a lot of rappers never truly master. In hip-hop, a line doesn't need a name attached to it to land like a bullet. So when 50 questioned the idea of anybody simply declaring themselves king, a lot of people understood exactly who that was aimed at. He didn't need to say T.I.'s name. That wasn't his style. Early 50 was surgical like that. Enough ambiguity for plausible deniability, but enough bite that the target would feel it immediately. And T.I did. But if that was the spark, then what followed was the fuel. By 2008, the tension took a darker turn. T.I. was dealing with a serious federal case involving weapons. It was the kind of situation that could destroy a career and bury a man under years of prison time. He ended up receiving a sentence far lighter than many people expected, and that opened the door for something poisonous, the snitch narrative. In rap, very few accusations stick like that one. Once that rumor enters the bloodstream, it doesn't matter how often it's denied. It becomes folklore. It becomes shorthand. It becomes one of those stains that people keep referencing long after the paperwork, the facts, and the context have been forgotten or distorted. And 50 understood exactly how powerful that accusation could be. From there, the tension wasn't just about music or status anymore. It turned into something more corrosive: credibility, street image, honor. The kind of things rappers may never fully admit matter as much as they do until somebody questions them in public. Over time, both men fired shots in different ways. There were comments, there were responses, there were moments when it seemed like the issue had cooled. For a while, it even looked dead. But dead and buried are not the same thing. Some beefs don't end. They just go quiet. The versus challenge that never left T.I.'s mind. Fast forward to the pandemic era, and the culture had found a new stage. Verzuz became the event. It gave artists a place to bring their catalogs, their pride, their histories, and their fan bases into one digital arena. For a moment, it felt like the closest thing hip-hop had to organized score settling without anyone stepping outside. And T.I. wanted 50. That part matters. Because when T.I. publicly challenged 50 Cent to a Verzuz battle, it wasn't just promo. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was also pride. It was a test, a way of saying, if we're going to talk about who mattered, who moved the culture, who really had impact, let's stop talking and line the records up. But 50 never embraced it. He mocked the whole idea, brushed it off, dismissed the format, treated it like it wasn't even worth his time. And that refusal may have done more damage than accepting ever could have. Because sometimes ignoring a challenge is a greater insult than responding to it. For T.I., that unresolved invitation seemed to linger. It didn't just disappear. It sat there, quietly, like unfinished business. And that's important because by the time 2026 arrived, what might have looked to outsiders like a fresh disagreement was actually connected to years of irritation, perception, and pride. So when T.I. began bringing that issue back up publicly, suggesting 50 had been avoiding him, hinting that smoke had been ducked, he wasn't speaking from nowhere. He was pulling an old thread that had never stopped bothering him. And once he pulled it, the whole thing unraveled fast. February 2026, when the old feud exploded again. This is where everything changes. Because in February 2026, this rivalry stopped feeling historical and started feeling immediate. T.I., in the middle of promoting Kill the King, publicly revisited the Verzuz conversation and framed 50 as somebody who didn't want the matchup. That alone was enough to get attention. But with a man like 50 Cent, attention is never neutral. If he hears you, he rarely responds the way you expect. He didn't jump in the booth. He didn't offer a formal rap reply. He did something colder. He went to the internet. Old clips resurfaced. Commentary resurfaced. Rat accusations resurfaced. He used visuals, captions, implication, and the kind of trolling energy he has perfected over the years. He knows how to ignite conversation without giving people the satisfaction of saying he fully entered the ring. That's the trick with 50. He can stand near the fire, toss in gasoline, and still act like he never agreed to the fight. T.I. answered back. Of course he did. And soon this thing wasn't just between two rap veterans anymore. It expanded outward. Family members got involved. Social media turned every insult into content. The line between strategy and emotion got blurrier by the day. Then came one of the moments that made the whole thing feel truly toxic: family shots. Once a man's wife gets dragged into the mess, the mood changes. Once children or parents become part of the public exchange, the room gets darker, and this beef went there, quickly. The Harris family didn't respond like bystanders. They responded like participants. Songs dropped, visuals dropped, posts kept flying. The conflict became a multi-person campaign, not a one-on-one dispute. And while that created more attention, more momentum, and more heat, it also changed the nature of the battle. It became bigger, messier, harder to control. And that's where DJ Akademiks really enters the story in a major way. Why DJ Akademiks matters here. A lot of people misunderstand Akademiks and reduce him to volume. They hear the voice, see the clips, catch the reactions, and assume he's just another internet personality chasing chaos for views. But whether people love him or hate him, there is one thing he's undeniably become in modern hip-hop media: a real-time narrator of rap conflict. He understands audience psychology. He understands how the internet scores beef. He understands the difference between lyrical quality and viral impact. And most importantly, he understands that in 2026, rap beef is no longer judged only by music. That's the key. A diss track is no longer just a diss track. It's a content event. It's a meme factory. It's a social weapon. It's a numbers game. It's a conversation engine. It's branding. It's timing. It's optics. Who controlled the timeline, who made people repost, who created the moment nobody could avoid. And Akademiks sees all of that. So as this feud between T.I and 50 started spiraling, he didn't just react to individual songs or insults. He began framing the bigger picture. He started asking the question that cuts deeper than who's winning. He asked, what kind of battle is this really? Because if one side thinks this is a rap war, while the other side is treating it like a reputation war, then they are not even playing the same sport. And that's exactly what Akademiks kept pointing out. Is this real beef or a rollout? One of the smartest things Akademiks did was refuse to look at this only on the surface. While a lot of people online were instantly picking a side, he was looking at timing, motive, and outcome. And from that angle, he raised a possibility that made a lot of people uncomfortable. What if this whole thing was also helping T.I.'s album campaign? That doesn't mean the emotions were fake. It doesn't mean nobody was really offended. It doesn't mean the disrespect wasn't real. But in the music industry, real emotion and strategic rollout often live in the same house. Sometimes they're roommates. And Akademiks saw signs of that immediately. T.I was dropping songs, the family was active, clips were spreading. The conversation kept circling back to his project. Traffic was building, attention was rising, streams and sales were responding. That matters. Because whether the original intent was purely personal, partially strategic, or somewhere in between, one thing was clear: the chaos was producing visibility. And this is where Akademiks becomes dangerous as an analyst. He doesn't just say, "This is hot." He asks, "Who benefits?" From that view, T.I was gaining momentum. He had the audience looking again. He had people discussing Kill the King. He had his family becoming talking points. He had the culture debating his bars and his choices. But then Akademiks made the more uncomfortable observation. He said, in essence, that T.I might be approaching this all wrong. Not because T.I couldn't rap. Nobody serious doubts that. T.I has long been a skilled MC. He has technical ability, structure, presence, cadence, and legacy. But according to Akademiks, that wasn't enough here. Because in a modern diss war, especially one built for the internet, technical skill alone doesn't win the day. Disrespect does. Shock does. Memorable moments do. The line people quote is usually not the most lyrical. It's the most ruthless. And Akademiks kept coming back to that point. He saw T.I. approaching diss records like a seasoned craftsman, carefully making records with bars and structure, while the internet wanted something uglier, more reckless, more instantly explosive. That's not a moral judgment, it's a strategic one. And from that standpoint, Akademiks believed T.I. was leaving impact on the table. The strange twist, T.I.'s son seemed more viral than T.I. This is one of the most fascinating parts of the whole thing. For all of T.I.'s skill, polish, and legacy, one of the loudest names in the campaign became his son, King Harris. Why? Because King moved without caution. He didn't sound like a man protecting a decades-long legacy. He sounded like somebody with nothing to lose and no interest in restraint. In internet beef, that can be a very powerful position. The person who doesn't care how wild it looks often creates the strongest reaction. And Akademiks noticed it. He gave King credit for bringing the kind of raw disrespect that grabs the timeline by the throat. While T.I. was still sounding like an artist with craftsmanship, King sounded like a young fighter swinging with zero concern for consequences. That difference matters, because it reflects the generational shift in how rap conflict gets consumed now. Older legends still think in terms of bars, catalog, stature, and respect. Younger voices understand that outrage spreads faster than craft. One sharp, reckless line can travel farther than 16 technically polished ones. One unhinged visual can outperform an entire carefully written song. And that's part of what made this so uncomfortable for T.I.'s position. The spectacle wasn't just about him anymore. It had become a family event, and some of the loudest attention was going toward the wildest participants, not necessarily the most accomplished one. That may create visibility, but visibility and control are not the same thing. Meanwhile, 50 Cent was playing a completely different game. This is the part Akademiks kept stressing over and over. T.I. and his side were still participating in the rap side of the conflict. Songs, bars, direct responses, public emotion, visible engagement. 50 was doing something else. He was trolling, posting, deleting, hinting, mocking, smiling, acting unserious while making sure the damage still landed. He understood that if he never fully committed musically, he couldn't really be judged by a traditional rap scoreboard. He denied the other side the clean battlefield they seemed to want. That's part of what makes 50 so difficult to fight. He doesn't always meet you where you are strongest. He drags the exchange into terrain he controls better than you do: narrative, humiliation, timing, public pressure, ridicule, and media leverage. Akademiks made a sharp comparison here. When a man has spent years being rap bully, the public eventually gets excited to see somebody hit back. That changes sympathy. It changes optics. But 50 seems to know that too. So instead of trying to win people's hearts, he aims to remain unpredictable, cruelly funny, and strategically dangerous. He doesn't need to out-rap you. He just needs to make your life harder. And that is where this story stops being a music story and becomes something much more serious. The documentary Threat changed everything. There are moments in beef when you can feel the temperature shift. This was one of them. Because once 50 Cent started publicly teasing the idea of a documentary centered on T.I. and Tiny, linked to long-standing civil allegations that the couple have denied, the nature of the conflict changed instantly. Let's be careful here. These are allegations, not criminal convictions. T.I. and Tiny have denied wrongdoing. Some legal matters connected to those accusations have been dismissed, while others have remained active in civil court. That distinction matters. It must matter. But from a strategic standpoint, 50 bringing that subject into the fight was a devastating escalation. Why? Because a diss record can embarrass you. A documentary threat can alter the entire public framework around your name. That's a different level of pressure. Akademiks immediately recognized it. He understood that this wasn't just messy internet behavior anymore. This was an attempt to turn unresolved, serious, legally sensitive issues into a media weapon. And once that enters the room, bars don't hit the same. That's why Akademiks said, in substance, that T.I might need to stop thinking like a rapper for a second and start thinking like a man under real threat. Because if a major documentary machine begins amplifying allegations to a broader mainstream audience, then this is no longer about who had the better diss track. This becomes about legal exposure, public image, interview pressure, narrative control, and survival. That is a terrifying shift if you are the person being targeted. And it also reveals the imbalance Akademiks kept pointing to. T.I appears to be fighting for his name, his record, his role as a husband, father, and elder statesman of Southern rap. That means he has something emotionally meaningful at stake. 50, on the other hand, seems to be fighting from a place of distance. His TV empire stands. His money stands. His persona as a provocateur stands. If the fight gets uglier, that may actually strengthen his brand rather than weaken it. And that's a very dangerous mismatch. Because the person fighting to protect something precious is often more vulnerable than the person fighting just to wreak havoc. The paperwork war and the power of accusation. Then there's the snitch talk. It shows up in almost every major rap conflict because it is one of the fastest ways to attack a man's identity. Even the accusation alone can do damage. It doesn't need to be proven in the eyes of the internet before it starts spreading. And both sides in different ways have tried to turn paperwork, alleged paperwork, or the idea of paperwork into a weapon. Akademiks' bigger insight here was that in modern beef, the concept of evidence can be almost as effective as actual evidence. The suggestion that something exists is often enough to feed weeks of speculation. By the time the public discovers that a claim is shaky, altered, disputed, or entirely unsupported, the damage may already be done. That's one of the ugliest truths about internet-era conflict. The accusation goes viral. The correction limps behind it. So whether the claims are airtight or not, the narrative value is still enormous. And 50 has always known how to weaponize narrative. Akademiks repeatedly pointed to that. He wasn't saying 50 had moral superiority. He was saying 50 understood leverage better than almost anybody. And leverage is what this whole story is becoming about. Not just bars, not just insults. Leverage, who can force the other man onto defense, who can make the next interview uncomfortable, who can move the conversation away from music and into something heavier, who can make the public associate the opponent with humiliation, uncertainty, or threat. That's the real battleground now. So who is actually winning? This is where most people want a simple answer. But the truth is more layered than that. If you judge it strictly from a rap standpoint, T.I and his side created more musical activity. They fed the battle with content. They appeared more eager. They delivered more on the traditional side of beef. They gave fans something to evaluate. From that angle, you can argue they won the musical rounds. But Akademiks kept emphasizing that 50 isn't really fighting in those rounds. He's fighting in optics. He's fighting in intimidation. He's fighting in suggestion. He's fighting in what happens next. And that may be the more powerful arena. T.I may have got the streaming bump. He may have generated buzz for Kill the King. He may have rallied his family and his fan base. Those are real wins. But 50, by introducing the documentary angle and by steering the public toward unresolved allegations rather than songs, may have shifted the battle into a place where T.I can't simply rap his way back into comfort. That's why Akademiks' coverage hit so hard. He wasn't just asking who had the better bars. He was asking who set the terms of the war. And if you control the terms, you often control the outcome. What this says about rap beef in 2026. Maybe the most important point Akademiks has made through all of this is that rap beef has changed. A lot of older artists still approach it like the old days: records, responses, direct challenges, lyrical tests. But the internet doesn't consume beef like that anymore. Not fully, not first. Now the audience wants moments. The post that makes people gasp. The line that becomes a caption. The clip that gets screen recorded before it disappears. The hint that sends blogs into overdrive. The threat that changes the energy of every interview after it. In that world, a man like 50 Cent is still incredibly dangerous because he understands spectacle as well as he understands insult. Maybe better. T.I is a legend. That is not up for debate. His influence is carved into Southern rap history. His catalog matters. His role in Atlanta's rise matters. His place in the culture is secure. But legends often fight to preserve dignity. And internet warfare does not reward dignity the way it once did. That's the brutal truth of it. The game moved. Akademiks sees that clearly. That's why his commentary has resonated. He isn't watching this like an old-school rap purist. He's watching it like a media strategist who knows that beef now spills across songs, podcasts, clips, court narratives, and the endless hunger of social media for the next outrageous turn. That doesn't mean he's always right, but it does mean he understands the battlefield. And right now, the battlefield looks unstable. The real danger ahead. The reason this story still feels unresolved is simple. Nothing important has truly ended yet. T.I is still attached to his rollout. 50 is still active in media and promotion. Akademiks is still narrating every twist. And the documentary threat is still hanging over the whole conflict like smoke after a fire. That matters because the longer a threat hangs in the air, the more powerful it can become. People begin filling in blanks themselves. They start imagining what could happen next. The uncertainty becomes its own weapon. And that may be the coldest part of all. Sometimes you don't need to drop the bomb. You just need people to believe you might. That is what makes 50's posture so unsettling here. He doesn't need to rush. He doesn't need to out-rap anybody. He just needs the possibility of escalation to remain alive. Meanwhile, T.I has to think about everything: music, image, family, legacy, public interviews, and the legal sensitivity around serious allegations that he and Tiny deny. That's not equal pressure. That's why this story feels less like a normal feud and more like a collision between two very different philosophies of warfare. T.I appears to want to defend himself, his art, and his respect. 50 appears willing to create confusion, fear, and pressure until the other side is forced to react on his terms. And Akademiks, standing outside the blast zone, is turning all of it into the running commentary of the year. So where does that leave this whole saga? It leaves us in a place that is messy, fascinating, and honestly a little sad. Because beneath the entertainment value, beneath the memes, beneath the streams and the captions and the scorekeeping, there is something human happening here too. There is ego, yes. There is strategy, yes. There is marketing, yes. But there is also aging pride, old resentment, public masculinity, family loyalty, fear of humiliation, fear of losing control over your own story. That's why this hits harder than the average rap spat. This isn't just about who can rhyme better. It's about what happens when two men who once defined dominance in their own ways refuse to let history stay in the past. One is still trying to prove something. The other is proving he never needs to play fair. And DJ Akademiks, for better or worse, has become the commentator translating that collision for an audience that now consumes conflict like serialized drama. The deeper truth may be this: T.I. might be trying to win the music. 50 might be trying to win the moment. And in 2026, the moment often matters more. But moments pass. What doesn't pass so easily is reputation. What doesn't pass so easily is legal pressure. What doesn't pass so easily is the emotional cost of dragging family, grief, and unresolved allegations into a fight that may have started with ego, but no longer belongs to ego alone. So the question now isn't just who won the last exchange. The real question is, who's going to still look whole when the noise finally dies down? Because sometimes the biggest loser in a public war is not the man who took the worst diss. It's the man who let the fight become bigger than the thing he was trying to defend. And right now, that is what makes this story impossible to look away from.